28. I thought I had it all figured out, or at least as much as anyone could in this chaotic world. Sophie and I were the kind of couple people envied. 3 years together. Two of them spent sharing an apartment that felt more like home every day. Our lives seemed to hum along perfectly like clockwork you could set your watch by. She worked in marketing, charming clients with her quick wit. I was a project manager in construction, keeping timelines tight and blueprints straight. We had good jobs, supportive families who adored each other. My mom even baked cookies for Sophie's dad during football Sundays, and friends who joked we were the golden standard for relationships. Hell, I'd started casually browsing engagement rings on my lunch breaks, imagining how she'd look wearing one while laughing at my dumb jokes or beating me at Monopoly again. Everything felt so inevitable. But beneath the surface of our picture-perfect life, there were cracks I refused to see or maybe didn't want to acknowledge. Looking back now, I realize those small signs were screaming warnings I ignored. Like how Sophie would sometimes zone out mid-conversation, scrolling through Instagram instead of listening. Or how she'd mention couples from articles she read online, couples experimenting with open relationships as though planting seeds in fertile soil. At the time, I brushed it off as idle chatter, nothing serious. But deep down, something gnawed at me, a quiet unease I couldn't quite name. Then came the Tuesday dinner that shattered everything. As I sat across from her, fork halfway to my mouth, Sophie dropped a bombshell so casually it took me a full minute to process what she'd said. "What do you think about trying an open relationship?" Her words hit me like a freight train, derailing years of trust and plans for the future. My appetite vanished instantly, the sandwich in front of me turning to ash in my mouth. All I could think was, where did this come from? And worse, is there someone else? The questions swirled in my mind like a storm, but Sophie just kept talking about growth, exploration, making our bond stronger. It sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this speech for weeks. That night, lying awake beside her, I stared at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. Something wasn't right. This wasn't Sophie being spontaneous, it was calculated, deliberate. For the first time, I wondered if the woman sleeping peacefully next to me was still the same person I fell in love with. The night Sophie dropped the bombshell about wanting an open relationship, I couldn't shake off the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't adding up. Her words echoed in my mind like a twisted mantra. It's not about anyone else. It's about us growing individually. Yet, as she spoke with such conviction, I noticed the faintest flicker of guilt in her eyes, a fleeting shadow that betrayed her carefully constructed facade. That same evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of our conversation. Something felt off, and then it hit me, her phone. I told myself I wasn't snooping, just checking for missed calls or messages, a pathetic excuse, I know. But when I picked up her phone from the kitchen counter where she'd left it charging, my heart sank. There, glaring back at me, was a notification on Tinder. You have 12 new matches. My hands trembled as I unlocked her phone, not out of excitement but dread, and what I discovered shattered whatever illusion of trust I still clung to. Sophie hadn't just casually considered opening our relationship. She'd been planning this for weeks, maybe even months. Her profile was polished, complete with sultry selfies and a bio that read, "Adventurous spirit looking for fun connections." Fun connections? Was this really who she thought she was? But the worst part came next. As I scrolled through her messages, bile rose in my throat. Conversations with multiple men unfolded before my eyes, flirty banter, plans for coffee dates, even exchanges about weekend getaways. One thread stood out. A guy named Jake, whose profile picture screamed Gym Rat, had sent her a message saying, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Tomorrow, it was Tuesday, and Sophie hadn't mentioned anything about going out. Worse still, their chat history stretched back nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks, she'd been lying to me while pretending everything was fine. My chest tightened as anger and betrayal coursed through me. How could she sit across from me during dinner, holding my hand and talking about how much she loved us, while secretly arranging dates behind my back? The hypocrisy burned like acid. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but fear paralyzed me. What if she denied everything? What if she turned the tables and made me look like the villain for invading her privacy? So instead, I returned her phone to its spot, careful not to leave any trace of my discovery, and retreated to the living room. Sitting alone in the dark, I replayed every interaction we'd had recently, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she been distant, distracted, or was I so blinded by love that I failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface? My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Who was this woman sharing my bed, and why did she feel the need to deceive me so thoroughly? The realization that Sophie viewed me as little more than a placeholder, a safety net while she explored other options, crushed me. The moment Sophie suggested the open relationship, I thought I was prepared for what might come next. But nothing could have prepared me for the whirlwind that followed. Within days, she transformed from the woman who once obsessed over our shared routines into someone I barely recognized. It started innocently enough, or at least it seemed that way at first. "Hey, can you help me with my dating app profiles?" she asked one evening, her voice light and casual, as if asking me to pass the salt. She sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through Tinder and Bumble like a seasoned pro, while I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, gripping the countertop for support. "Sure," I managed to say, though my throat felt dry. She handed me her phone, smiling brightly, completely oblivious to how surreal this all felt. As I scrolled through potential profile pictures, each photo seemed sharper, more polished than the last. Sophie laughing under golden sunlight, Sophie posing with her favorite coffee mug, Sophie looking effortlessly beautiful in ways I had always admired but now found suffocating. "This one's perfect," she said, pointing to a selfie where she wore just a hint of makeup, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I nodded numbly, pretending to agree, while inside I was screaming, "Who is this person?" But the real shock came when she asked me to take new photos of her. "Come on, you're great at angles," she chirped, pulling out her DSLR camera like we were staging some sort of glamorous photo shoot. I followed her outside, mechanically adjusting the lens as she struck pose after pose, leaning against trees, sitting on park benches, even lying in the grass like some carefree model. Each click of the shutter echoed in my ears like a countdown to something inevitable. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, helping my girlfriend look desirable for other men. And then the dates began. At first, they trickled in sporadically, a coffee here, a dinner there, but soon, her calendar filled up faster than I could keep track. Every night became an event, every outfit meticulously chosen. One evening, she emerged from our bedroom wearing a sleek black dress I'd never seen before. "How do I look?" she asked, twirling dramatically. I forced a smile, choking back the words I really wanted to say. "Why are you trying so hard for someone else?" Instead, I muttered, "You look great," and watched as she strutted out the door, leaving behind a cloud of unfamiliar perfume. As the weeks passed, Sophie changed not just in appearance but in demeanor. Gone was the warmth I used to know. Instead, she treated me like an afterthought. Our Sunday pancake tradition, forgotten. Movie nights, replaced by texts buzzing late into the night from people I didn't know. Once, I caught her giggling at something on her phone, her face glowing with excitement. When I asked who she was talking to, she shrugged dismissively. "Just someone," she said, as if it meant nothing. But to me, it meant everything. What hurt most wasn't just the neglect, it was the deliberate erasure of us. She stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing the little things that used to matter. One night, I made her favorite pasta dish, hoping to recapture a shred of what we'd lost. She barely touched it, too busy scrolling through messages. "I'm not hungry," she said absently, reaching for her phone again. That meal sat untouched on the table between us, a silent testament to how far apart we'd grown. As Sophie continued her whirlwind of dates and late-night escapades, Emma began showing up at our apartment more frequently. At first, it seemed innocent enough. She'd drop by to borrow something or share a funny story about work, but I couldn't help but notice how often she appeared when Sophie was out with one of her new friends. One evening, after Sophie had left for yet another date, Emma knocked on the door holding a mixing bowl. "I need this for a cake," she said casually, though I suspected she didn't actually need my bowl. That night, something shifted between us. She sat down on the couch, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic seriousness. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, tilting her head as if studying me under a microscope. "What's going on?" And just like that, the dam broke. All the frustration, anger, and heartache I'd been bottling up spilled out in a torrent of words. I told her everything: Sophie's sudden proposal of an open relationship, her endless parade of men, the way she'd changed at home, leaving me feeling invisible. Emma listened, not the polite nodding kind of listening, but the kind where you can see someone genuinely absorbing every word. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "That's not an open relationship," she said firmly. "That's Sophie doing whatever she wants without caring how it affects you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. For weeks, I'd felt like I was losing my mind, questioning whether I was overreacting or being unreasonable. Hearing Emma validate my feelings made me realize I wasn't crazy. It was Sophie who was behaving recklessly. From that moment on, Emma started coming around even more, always finding excuses to visit when Sophie was out. We'd order takeout, watch movies, or just sit in comfortable silence. It was during these moments that I began to see Emma differently, not just as Sophie's best friend, but as someone who truly understood me. One night, about a month into Sophie's exploration, Emma arrived looking unusually nervous. She fidgeted with her necklace, a habit I'd come to recognize as a sign of anxiety, and hesitated before sitting down on the couch. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, her voice trembling. My stomach flipped, a mix of dread and anticipation swirling inside me. "I've had feelings for you for a long time," she admitted, her eyes glued to her hands. "Since before you and Sophie even got together. But you were with her, and she's my best friend, so I never said anything." The room seemed to shrink around me as her confession sank in. Emma, sweet, dependable Emma. The woman who'd helped me pick out gifts for Sophie, who'd brought me soup when I was sick while Sophie barely texted to check in. How had I missed it? "You don't have to say anything," she added quickly, misinterpreting my stunned silence. "I just needed you to know." But I did have something to say. Watching Sophie treat me like an afterthought, seeing how little she cared about my feelings, had awakened something in me, a desire to be with someone who truly valued me. That night, as we sat there awkwardly avoiding each other's gaze, I realized Emma wasn't just Sophie's friend anymore. She was someone who saw me, really saw me, in a way Sophie never had. A few days later, Emma came over again, this time bringing coffee and pastries. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories until the conversation turned serious. "I hate seeing you like this," she said softly, her green eyes filled with concern. "You deserve better than what she's giving you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Before I could respond, she leaned in and kissed me. For a split second, guilt flashed through my mind. Sophie's face, her friendship with Emma, but then all rational thought dissolved. I kissed her back, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. We spent the night together, and it wasn't like anything I'd experienced with Sophie. Emma noticed things: the way I smiled when she teased me, the way I tensed when certain topics came up. She cared about my thoughts, my feelings, my happiness. Lying there afterward, I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for Sophie to hurt me again. "What are we going to do?" Emma whispered, breaking the silence. I exhaled, staring at the ceiling. I should have felt conflicted, guilty, torn, but all I felt was relief. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Sophie began showing up at places I frequented, places she'd never cared about before. The coffee shop near my office where I grabbed my morning latte. Suddenly, she just happened to be there on her way to a meeting, the gym I went to after work. She claimed she was trying out a new yoga class in the same building. At first, I thought it was coincidence or maybe paranoia, but then it became clear she was watching me. Every casual comment I made about grabbing lunch or meeting friends turned into an ambush. One evening, as I texted Emma about dinner plans, Sophie practically leapt across the couch to snatch my phone from my hands. "Who are you texting?" she asked, her voice strained with forced nonchalance. "No one," I replied coolly, reclaiming my phone without looking up. But inside, my heart raced. This wasn't the Sophie I knew, the carefree woman who once laughed off late-night texts or ignored missed calls altogether. No, this was someone else entirely: possessive, suspicious, and desperate. Her snooping escalated quickly. If I left my phone unattended for even a moment, she'd pounce on it like a hawk circling prey. I caught her scrolling through my messages more than once, pretending to be distracted when I walked back into the room. She wasn't subtle about it either. She'd leave my texts open on the screen or place the phone down slightly askew, as if daring me to confront her. When I finally did, she played innocent. "I was just checking the time." She'd say, "Why died?" as though expecting me to believe her act. But what really tipped me off was how she started canceling her dates. Gone were the nights she spent primping for strangers, replaced by sudden declarations of wanting to stay in. "Let's watch that show you like," she'd suggest, curling up next to me on the couch like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. Her attempts to win me back felt hollow, calculated, a performance meant to remind me of what we used to have while conveniently forgetting why we'd fallen apart in the first place. One day, she dropped a bombshell over breakfast. Sitting across from me, she clasped her hands together and said, "I think we should close the relationship again." Her tone was solemn, almost pleading, as if she were offering me some grand gesture of reconciliation. "We've explored enough," she continued, reaching for my hand. I pulled away instinctively, my stomach churning. "What makes you think I want that?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. "Well, isn't that what you wanted all along?" she replied, confusion flickering across her face. "You haven't seemed happy with the open relationship." "And whose fault is that?" I shot back, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You're the one who paraded around with other guys, barely acknowledged me, and now you expect me to just forget everything and go back to how things were." She flinched but pressed on. "I'm saying we can focus on us now, just you and me." "Just you and me," I repeated bitterly, like none of this ever happened. Sophie grew defensive, her voice rising. "I thought you'd be happy. Isn't this what you wanted, to stop seeing other people and fix what we have?" "No," I said firmly. "What I wanted was for you to value me, not treat me like a placeholder while you lived your best life elsewhere." Her face twisted in frustration. "But you could have been dating too. You agreed to this." "I have been dating," I countered, letting the truth hang in the air between us. For a moment, she froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. Then, panic set in. Who is it?" "It doesn't matter," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Isn't that what you always told me? That details don't matter in an open relationship." The irony wasn't lost on her. She stormed out of the apartment that night, muttering under her breath about betrayal and lies. But deep down, I knew the truth. She couldn't stand the idea of losing control. For weeks, she had been living as though she could have it all, freedom to explore while keeping me tethered to her side. Now, faced with the reality that I'd moved on, she was scrambling to reclaim what she thought she owned. The tension had been building for weeks, like a storm cloud hovering just above us, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment Sophie finally pieced everything together. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. One morning, after Emma posted a casual selfie at the coffee shop where I usually grabbed my morning latte, Sophie's paranoia reached its boiling point. "Are you with Emma right now?" she demanded over the phone, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I'm at work," I replied calmly, letting her stew in her suspicions for a moment before adding, "That coffee shop has thousands of customers every day. People can go there without it meaning anything." But Sophie wasn't buying it. From that moment on, she became obsessed, checking my social media activity, analyzing every interaction I had online, even following Emma's posts with an intensity that bordered on mania. Her jealousy consumed her, turning her into someone unrecognizable. The woman who once laughed off late-night texts was now interrogating me about every text notification that lit up my screen. Then came the confrontation. Sophie showed up at our apartment one evening, her face flushed with anger and desperation. She paced back and forth, firing questions at me. Who is it? Is it Emma? Are you sleeping with Emma? Each question felt like a dagger slicing through what little remained of our relationship. When I didn't deny it, her expression shifted from suspicion to outright fury. You're lying. Emma would never do that to me. She screamed, clutching her head as if trying to hold herself together. But the truth was undeniable, and Sophie knew it. That night, she grabbed her keys and stormed out, declaring she was going to Emma's place to confront her. As soon as the door slammed shut behind her, I called Emma to warn her. Let her come, Emma said, her voice steady despite the chaos about to unfold. She's been my best friend for 10 years. I owe her this much. What happened next was pure chaos. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a call from Emma. Her voice, usually calm and composed, was shaky. She showed up screaming. Emma explained, my neighbors probably heard everything. She kept yelling about how I betrayed her, how we'd been sneaking around behind her back for months. Apparently, Sophie had convinced herself of some twisted alternate reality where every friendly interaction between Emma and me was evidence of betrayal. Even when I brought you soup last winter, apparently that was just a cover for hooking up, Emma added bitterly. When Sophie tried to push past Emma into her apartment to search for proof of my presence, Emma blocked the doorway. Sophie accused her of hiding me, her voice rising to hysterical levels. She's completely lost it, Emma told me later. She started listing random times we hung out, trying to prove we'd been secretly plotting against her. Then she broke down crying, sliding down the doorframe and saying she never meant for any of this to happen. The scene escalated further when Mrs. Chen, Emma's neighbor, threatened to call the police due to the noise. Only then did Sophie leave, but not before delivering one final blow. You've ruined everything, and I'll never forgive you. When Sophie returned to our apartment later that night, she was a wreck. Seeing me texting Emma updates sent her over the edge. How long have you two been laughing at me behind my back? She shrieked, throwing things across the room. Pictures, gifts, mementos all were tossed into a box as she packed her belongings. I'm staying at Jessica's, she declared, her voice dripping with venom. A real friend, someone who wouldn't stab me in the back. Fine by me, I shot back, tired of her hypocrisy. Take whatever you want. That stopped her cold. For a brief moment, she looked small, vulnerable. I thought you'd always be here, she whispered, her voice cracking. That no matter who else I dated, you'd wait for me. And there it was, the truth laid bare. I wasn't her partner. I was her safety net, her guaranteed happy ending while she explored other options. Well, you thought wrong, I told her firmly. I'm not some loyal puppy waiting faithfully by the door while you're out having fun. I deserve better than being your second choice. The aftermath of Sophie's explosive confrontation with Emma marked a turning point that neither she nor I could have anticipated. For weeks, Sophie clung to her version of events, spinning tales about betrayal and deceit among our mutual friends. Emma manipulated you, she'd hiss in texts or during brief encounters when she came to collect more belongings. You were confused, vulnerable. She took advantage of that. Her words dripped with venom, but they no longer carried weight. Each accusation felt like an echo from a past life, one I was determined to leave behind. Emma and I, on the other hand, moved forward cautiously yet deliberately. After Sophie's dramatic exit, we decided not to rush into anything, not because we doubted each other, but because we wanted to build something real, something unshakable. Our first official date wasn't grand or elaborate. It was simple. Coffee at her favorite cafe, where sunlight streamed through large windows, casting warm golden hues across the table. We sat there for hours, talking about everything: our fears, our hopes, the mistakes we'd made along the way. When she reached across the table to hold my hand, it wasn't just affection, it was a promise. A promise to choose each other, fully and without reservation. But Sophie didn't disappear quietly. She continued to weave her narrative, painting herself as the victim and us as villains in her story. Social media became her stage, where cryptic posts hinted at heartbreak and betrayal. Some people only care about themselves, one read, accompanied by a photo of her crying under dim lighting. Another post accused named individuals of ruining friendships and destroying trust. Her audience lapped it up, offering condolences and siding with her without knowing the full truth, yet none of it mattered anymore. Every time my phone buzzed with notifications, I simply muted them. Emma did the same. "Let her tell her story," Emma said one evening, curling up beside me on the couch. "Ours is better." And she was right. While Sophie thrived on drama, we chose authenticity. We began building routines together, small but meaningful rituals that anchored us. Sunday mornings were reserved for pancakes again, not because we needed to replace old traditions, but because we wanted to create new ones. Emma introduced me to her kindergarten students' artwork, which now adorn my fridge. "It makes your place feel warmer," she explained, smiling softly. In return, I helped her grade papers late at night while we binge-watched mystery shows. These moments weren't extraordinary, but they were ours. Still, Sophie's lingering presence occasionally cast shadows over our newfound happiness. One afternoon, while grocery shopping, I spotted her across the aisle. She froze mid-step, glaring at me before storming off, leaving her cart abandoned. The encounter left me unsettled, not because I felt guilty, but because it reminded me of how far we'd come and how much effort Sophie was still putting into holding on to anger instead of letting go. That night, I confided in Emma, who listened patiently. "She realized eventually," Emma said, her voice steady. "Until then, let's focus on what we're building." What we were building wasn't like anything either of us had experienced before. It wasn't perfect, we argued sometimes, miscommunicated others, but it was honest. There were no hidden agendas, no half-hearted commitments. With Emma, I found someone who saw me, truly saw me, in ways Sophie never had, and in return, I gave her the same unwavering attention. Together, we vowed to nurture a relationship rooted in respect, understanding, and love, the kind of love that doesn't demand sacrifices but celebrates growth. When Sophie discovered the truth about my relationship with Emma, her reaction was nothing short of explosive. At first, she tried to play it cool, acting like she didn't care while secretly spiraling out of control. But then came the threats, dark, desperate messages that made my blood run cold. "If you leave me for her, I have no reason to keep going," one text read, followed by a photo of an empty pill bottle. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, unsure if this was just another manipulative tactic or something far more dangerous. I called Emma immediately, my voice trembling. "She's threatening to hurt herself," I said, panic rising in my chest. "She wouldn't actually do it," Emma replied, though her tone betrayed her own uncertainty. But Sophie wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications on my phone. She had posted private photos of me, pictures from vacations, candid shots I never knew she'd taken, and captioned them with venomous accusations. "This is what happens when you trust someone completely. He took everything and threw it away from my so-called best friend." Her words spread like wildfire across social media, drawing comments from people who didn't even know the full story. Some sided with her, others mocked her for being dramatic. Either way, my privacy felt violated, my dignity stripped bare. Things escalated further when I noticed a black sedan parked outside my workplace. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but over the next few days, the car appeared everywhere I went: the gym, the grocery store, even the coffee shop where Emma and I met. It became clear Sophie had hired someone to follow me, to document every move I made. One evening, as I walked back to my apartment, the driver stepped out of the car and handed me an envelope filled with printed screenshots of my texts with Emma, along with a note scrawled in Sophie's handwriting: "You think you can replace me? Think again." The tension reached its peak one Friday night when Sophie showed up unannounced at my door, visibly intoxicated. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled, and her voice slurred as she screamed accusations at me. "You ruined everything," she yelled, pounding her fists against my chest. Before I could calm her down, she stumbled backward, tripped over the stairs, and collapsed onto the pavement. I rushed to help her, but she pushed me away, shouting, "Don't touch me." Then, without warning, she got into her car and sped off into the night. An hour later, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Sophie had crashed her car into a tree after losing control while driving drunk. They found her unconscious behind the wheel, her phone still clutched in her hand, open to a draft message addressed to me. "If I can't have you, no one will." Hearing those words sent chills down my spine. For the first time, I realized how far Sophie was willing to go to punish me for leaving her. Emma stayed by my side throughout the ordeal, holding me together when guilt threatened to consume me. "This isn't your fault," she reminded me repeatedly. "She made her choices, and we're dealing with the consequences." Still, the weight of it all pressed heavily on my shoulders. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sophie's face, broken, angry, and desperate. Looking back, I realize how much Sophie's proposal of an open relationship shattered my illusions about love, but also how it ultimately saved me. In those early days, when she first suggested the idea, I thought I was losing my mind. How could someone who claimed to care about me so deeply suddenly want to share me with others? At the time, I convinced myself that agreeing was the right thing to do, that maybe this was just another phase we'd work through together. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted. What I didn't understand then but see so clearly now is that relationships aren't built on convenience or obligation. They're built on mutual respect and genuine connection. The hardest part wasn't watching Sophie date other people, it was realizing how little she valued what we had. She treated me like a placeholder, someone guaranteed to be there no matter how far she strayed. And while I tried to hold on to hope that things would return to normal, her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The way she lit up for those men, the effort she put into looking perfect for them, contrasted sharply with how dismissive she became at home. It stung more than I cared to admit. For weeks, I wrestled with guilt, wondering if I deserved better or if I was being selfish for wanting exclusivity. But meeting Emma changed everything. She didn't just listen to my frustrations, she validated them. When she confessed her feelings for me, it wasn't just a confession, it was a revelation. Here was someone who saw me as more than just Sophie's boyfriend. With Emma, I felt seen in ways I never had before. Her kindness wasn't performative, it was authentic. The way she noticed small details, the way I stirred my coffee, the books I left lying around, it made me realize how much I'd been craving true attention, not the half-hearted affection Sophie gave me when it suited her. Through all the chaos, the confrontations, the betrayals, the heartache, I learned one undeniable truth: I deserve someone who chooses me, not out of habit or obligation, but because they genuinely want to. Sophie's decision to pursue an open relationship forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and what I need in a partner. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it felt like betrayal. But without that pain, I might never have found the courage to walk away from something toxic and embrace something real. And isn't that life's greatest irony? Sometimes, the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes. If Sophie hadn't pushed me into a situation I didn't want, I wouldn't have discovered Emma or the kind of love that feels like coming home. Now, sitting here with her laughter echoing in the background as she grades papers beside me, I can't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the mess, the heartbreak, even the anger, because it led me here to a relationship rooted in trust, respect, and unwavering support.